Welcome back to Level 3. This is Lecture 25, Bacteria, Fungi, and Viruses, the basics every QC analyst needs. Last lecture, we talked about why microbiology matters and where contamination comes from. But before we go any further into this level, we need to slow down and build a proper foundation. You cannot investigate, sample, or specify against an organism you cannot classify. So today is about building a working map of the 3 organism types you will spend the next 10 lectures testing for, and understanding why each one plays by completely different rules. Here is what we will cover today. Number 1, you will understand the 3 organism types QC analysts test for: bacteria, fungi, and viruses, and how they differ at the cell level. Number 2, you will know how bacteria are shaped, how they reproduce, and why the bacterial growth curve determines whether you can actually trust a result. Number 3, you will understand the difference between yeasts and molds, and why fungi need different incubation and interpretation rules than bacteria. Number 4, you will see why viruses cannot be cultured on standard agar, and why that single fact changes how they are detected entirely. Number 5, you will be able to compare all 3 organism types side by side: size, structure, reproduction, and how each one is actually tested. Let's start with the big picture. Everything you will test for in this level falls into one of 3 categories. They look nothing alike under a microscope, and none of them are tested for in the same way. Bacteria are single-celled organisms with no nucleus, what we call prokaryotic. They reproduce by simple division, and they are the organisms that most GMP microbiology testing is actually built around. Fungi cover both yeasts and molds. They do have a nucleus, so they are eukaryotic, more structurally complex than bacteria. They reproduce by budding or by spores, and they are generally slower growing, tougher, and honestly often overlooked compared to bacteria. Viruses are the strangest of the 3. A virus is not even a complete cell. It is genetic material sitting inside a protein coat. It cannot reproduce without a host, and critically, it cannot be cultured on standard agar at all. We will spend real time on why that matters. Keep this 3-way split in your head. Every method you learn for the rest of this level exists because of one of these 3 categories. Let's start with bacteria, because they are the organisms you will work with most. Every bacterium is a single cell with no nucleus. Its genetic material just floats freely inside the cell. What every bacterium does have is a cell wall, and that wall does 2 jobs. It gives the cell its shape, and it protects it. Remember that wall, because it is exactly what next lecture's Graham stain reacts to. Bacteria come in 3 basic shapes. Cocci are spherical or round, and they can occur singly, in pairs, in chains, or in clusters. Bacilli are rod-shaped, and this is the most common shape among the bacteria relevant to food and pharma QC. And spirilla, or spirochetes, are spiral or corkscrew-shaped. Far less common in routine QC testing, but worth being able to recognize. Now, reproduction. Bacteria reproduce by binary fission. One cell splits into 2 identical daughter cells. Under good conditions, this can happen every 20 minutes. Sit with that for a second. Every 20 minutes, the population can double. That is exactly why bacterial counts can climb so fast, and it sets up everything we are about to discuss on the next slide. Take a look at the micrograph on this slide. You can see all 3 shapes laid out side by side, and once you have seen them next to each other like this, you will not forget the difference. This is one of the most important slides in this entire lecture, the bacterial growth curve. When a bacterial population starts growing, it does not just climb in a straight line. It moves through 4 distinct phases, and you can see them laid out on the chart, each shaded a different color. The first phase is lag. The population barely changes here. The bacteria are adapting to their new environment, not yet dividing rapidly. The second phase is log, short for logarithmic. This is exponential growth. The population climbs steeply, doubling again and again. The third phase is stationary. Growth levels off. Nutrients are becoming limited, waste products are building up, and the rate of new cells being produced roughly balances the rate of cells dying. And the fourth phase is death. Nutrients are depleted, waste has accumulated, and the population starts to decline. Here is why this matters for your actual job. If you sample too early, during lag or early log phase, you can underreport a real contamination, because the population simply has not built up yet. If you sample too late, into stationary or death phase, competing organisms or nutrient depletion can distort your count in the other direction. This is exactly why validated incubation times in your methods are not a suggestion. They are calibrated to catch the population at a point where the result actually means something. Now let's move to fungi, which covers both yeasts and molds, and they are structurally quite different from each other. Yeasts are single-celled. They are oval or round, and they reproduce by budding, where a small daughter cell literally pinches off the parent cell. On agar, yeast colonies look moist, cream-colored, and smooth, and I want to flag this clearly. They are genuinely easy to mistake for bacteria at a glance. Do not assume smooth and cream-colored automatically means bacterial. Molds are multicellular. They grow as thread-like filaments called hyphae, and together those filaments form what is called a mycelium. Molds reproduce mainly through spores, which is exactly why mold spreads the way it does and why it is so easily airborne. Now, why does any of this matter in QC? 3 reasons. First, fungi tolerate low pH and low water activity far better than bacteria do, which is why they are what spoils jams, dried goods, and other acidic products that bacteria usually cannot touch. Second, some molds, certain Aspergillus species in particular, produce mycotoxins, toxic compounds that can survive even after the mold itself is gone. That makes mold a genuine safety question, not just a cosmetic one. And third, fungi simply grow slower than bacteria. Typical incubation is 5 to 7 days, which is exactly why yeast and mold testing, which we cover in Lecture 29, runs on a longer timeline than most bacterial methods. Now for the organism that breaks all the rules we just built, viruses. A virus is not really a cell at all. It is genetic material, either DNA or RNA, wrapped in a protein coat, and sometimes there is a lipid envelope around that. There is no cell wall. No ribosomes. No independent metabolism. Nothing that lets it live or reproduce on its own. 3 facts to hold on to here. First, a virus is what we call an obligate intracellular parasite. It can only reproduce by hijacking a living host cell's own machinery. Outside a host, it does absolutely nothing. Second, viruses are extremely small. Roughly 20 to 300 nanometers, compared to a bacterium's typical 500 to 5,000 nanometers. We will put that in visual perspective in a couple of slides. And third, viruses are not visible with a standard light microscope. You need electron microscopy to actually see one directly. A standard lab microscope simply cannot resolve something that small. Take a look at the electron microscope image on this slide. Seeing the actual structure like this will make the next slide click much faster than description alone. So here is the consequence of everything we just covered. Viruses are tested for in a completely different way from bacteria and fungi. Because a virus cannot reproduce on its own, it cannot grow on standard microbiological agar the way bacteria and fungi do. I want to be very precise about this. A total plate count will never detect a virus. Not because the method failed. Not because something was done wrong. It is because the organism was never physically capable of forming a colony in the first place. So how are viruses actually detected? 3 main approaches. Cell culture, which means growing the virus inside living host cells in a lab. It is slow and specialized, and it is not routine QC work. PCR, or molecular testing, which detects the virus's genetic material directly. This is fast, sensitive, and it is the most common approach you will encounter in food and pharma testing. And serology, or immunoassay, which detects viral proteins, or the antibodies produced against them. This shows up more in clinical settings and in some pharma release testing. Where does this actually matter in practice? In food safety, norovirus and hepatitis A are the 2 viruses most often linked to foodborne illness, typically traced back to an infected food handler or contaminated shellfish. In pharma, if you are working with cell culture-based biologics, those products must be tested for adventitious viral agents. and viral clearance has to be validated as part of the manufacturing process itself. I want to put the size difference we have been discussing into real visual perspective, because it is not just a minor detail. It is the actual reason some methods work for one organism and are physically useless for another. Look at the scale on this slide. It is logarithmic, which means each major step represents a tenfold jump in size, not a simple linear increase. On the far left end of that spectrum sits the virus, at roughly 20 to 300 nanometers. Move along the scale and you reach the bacterium, at roughly half a micron to 5 microns, already noticeably larger. Continue along and you reach the fungal spore, at roughly 2 to 10 microns. And for reference, I have placed the red blood cell on the same scale, at roughly 7 to 8 microns, since most people have some intuitive sense of how small a blood cell actually is. This is exactly why viruses need electron microscopy and molecular detection, while bacteria and fungi are large enough to grow into visible colonies that you can count with the naked eye. Size is not a side detail here. It is the entire reason the toolkit looks so different across these three organism types. Let's pull everything from today together into one table, because I want you to be able to compare all three organism types directly. Cell type: bacteria are prokaryotic, no nucleus. Fungi are eukaryotic, they do have a nucleus. Viruses are not a cell at all, just genetic material and a protein coat. Typical size: bacteria run half a micron to 5 microns. Fungal spores run 2 to 10 microns, though hyphae themselves can be much longer. Viruses run 20 to 300 nanometers, dramatically smaller than either. Reproduction: bacteria use binary fission. Fungi use budding for yeast, or spores for mold. Viruses can only reproduce by hijacking a host cell entirely. Does it grow on standard agar? Yes, for bacteria. Yes, but slower for fungi, and no for viruses, which require host cells instead. Typical incubation: 24 to 48 hours for bacteria, 5 to 7 days for fungi, and not applicable for viruses since they need molecular or cell-based methods rather than incubation on a plate at all. And QC relevant examples: for bacteria, think Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli, and Staphylococcus aureus, all of which we will cover later in this level. For fungi, think Aspergillus and general yeast spoilage organisms. And for viruses, think norovirus, hepatitis A, and adventitious agents in a pharma context. Keep this table in mind as we move through the rest of this level. Every method we cover connects back to one row here. Before we close, let me walk through the mistakes I see most often when people are new to telling these organism types apart. The first mistake is assuming one incubation time fits all organisms. Bacteria, yeasts, and molds grow at genuinely different speeds. Using a bacterial timeline for a fungal test will underreport real contamination, every time. The second mistake is mistaking a yeast colony for a bacterial colony. Both can look moist, smooth, and cream-colored on agar. Colony morphology alone is not always enough to tell them apart, so know when you need to confirm further. The third mistake is assuming a clean total plate count rules out viruses. It does not, and it never will. TPC only detects organisms that are capable of forming a colony. Viruses physically cannot do that, so a passing TPC tells you nothing at all about viral contamination. The fourth mistake is treating mold as just cosmetic. Some molds produce mycotoxins that persist even after the visible mold itself is gone or has been removed. The presence of mold is a safety question, not just an appearance one. And the fifth mistake is forgetting that size determines the method. You cannot swab and plate your way to a virus. Choosing the right method always starts with knowing what you are actually looking for. Let's bring this lecture to a close with the key takeaways. Number 1. Bacteria are single prokaryotic cells that reproduce by binary fission, fast, and shaped as cocci, bacilli, or spirilla. Number 2. The bacterial growth curve has 4 phases: lag, log, stationary, death. Sampling timing changes what your result actually means. Number 3. Fungi are eukaryotic. Yeasts bud, molds grow as hyphae and spread by spores. Both grow slower than bacteria and need longer incubation. Number 4. Some molds produce mycotoxins that persist after the mold itself is gone. Mold is a safety issue, not a cosmetic one. Number 5. Viruses are not cells. They cannot reproduce without a host, and they cannot be cultured on standard agar. They need molecular or cell-based methods instead. Number 6. Size drives method choice. Bacteria and fungi are visible to the eye once grown. Viruses are 10 to 100 times smaller and need entirely different tools. That is Lecture 25 complete. You now know how bacteria, fungi, and viruses differ at the cell level, why each one grows and gets tested differently, and how size alone determines which methods are even physically possible in the first place. Up next is Lecture 26, Gram-positive versus Gram-negative, what it means in practice. That lecture builds directly on the bacterial cell wall we touched on today, and it explains one of the single most important distinctions in all of bacterial identification. Take a look at the roadmap on this slide. Lecture 24 is done, we are wrapping up Lecture 25 right now, and there are 10 more lectures ahead building towards specific pathogens like Salmonella and Listeria. If this lecture helped you, please give it a like. Subscribe for new lectures every week. And drop your questions in the comments, they get read and answered. See you in Lecture 26.